Well, hello and welcome to another episode of More Perfect Marketing. It's David Baer here, and I'm wondering if you spent the pandemic sort of the way that I did. Some people, we're recording right now, it's the second half of 2022. Uh, in some parts of the world, there is still, some form of a pandemic going on, but for the most part, we feel like we're past it. But I can remember that early on, 2020 and 2021, I was spending a lot of time learning how to bake. I baked a lot of sourdough bread. I think a lot of people baked sourdough bread. I went on long hikes here in Oregon, where we have beautiful trails and waterfalls and all kinds of cool stuff that I got to do. But I didn't spend it nearly as adventuresomely. Is that a word? As today's guest. And I'm excited to sort of share this story that I recently discovered of Lux Narayan and the stories that he shared from some of his activities over the course of 2020. So, Lux, welcome to More Perfect Marketing.
Hey, thank you, David. Thanks for having me.
I am super excited for this conversation because as I discovered you and discovered more about you, I learned that you are, first of all, a fascinating individual who has spent time professionally doing pretty darn cool stuff, creating various businesses and projects in and around the marketing world. And at the same time, you have these personal passions that you've also decided to share publicly and sort of teach from as well. And so the very first thing that I ever encountered um, uh, from you was, I think it must have been 2017. You did a New York City a TED Talk. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was around 2017. Yes.
Something around there. And it was a really interesting presentation around a personal passion of yours, but you opened it talking about what you did professionally. And I wonder if you might just share a little snippet of sort of what you discussed in that talk.
Hey, sure. I mean, first of all, thanks for checking that out. And when you said 2017, it just struck me that our whole timelines are now pre-COVID and post-COVID. So it's, I mean, I like to think of it as post-COVID in line with what you said a little while earlier. But yes, this was around 2017, and it was a talk at the main TED office here in New York. And the talk was on lessons from 2000 obituaries. And maybe I should give a little context for that before people wonder what kind of guest you got on your show.
Yes.
But I've been a lifelong fan of reading the obituaries. Right? There was this expression someone said that if you want to learn about man's failures, start reading the newspaper from the front, and if you want to know about man's achievements and successes, start from the back, which is where the obituaries used to be when newspapers used to have just one section and did not weigh about 5 pounds or stuff like that. So it's just a fascinating kaleidoscope of the kind of things that people do, the lives they lead, the things they're remembered for. And at that time, I was also running a company that I was the CEO and a co-founder at a company called Unmetric, which was a social media benchmarking platform for brands. And the fundamental thesis was if you could study history in terms of what other brands had done previously, besides just benchmarking yourself against them, you would get insights on what to do for the future, right? And in fact, I think it was Winston Churchill's favorite expression. He said, study history because all the strategies of warfare are in history. So Unmetric was a company that benchmarked and indexed the activities of 150,000 brands on the planet, and therefore allowed a client like General Motors to figure out where they stood versus Toyota on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and so on. So this fundamental thesis of look at history, look at a rear view mirror in terms of what's happened in the past to get lessons for the future is kind of the kernel of what we used to do as a company. And when I had an opportunity to do a TED talk, due to, again, a series of curious incidents, this presented itself as a very natural thing to talk about because I was reading the obituaries every day. I was distilling lessons from that. I ran a data analytics company. So what if we took 2000 obituaries and then figure out data patterns in them in terms of what people did when they accomplish things. I mean, let me just take one example. All of us are so much in a rush to accomplish things when we're young and stuff. The average age of accomplishment of all those people featured in the obituaries was about 42 or 43 years
Mm.
old, which tells you a little bit about patience. So what can we learn from lives well led? And that was the subject of the talk.
Yeah, it was fascinating. I'm curious. Did you read the obituaries this morning?
I did.
Yep.
In fact,
And
I have
I
a bunch here with about a dozen of them that I haven't read over the last week or so. So I keep collecting them and then I binge read
yeah.
them.
We were talking before I started to hit record, and you learned from me that I've spent time in the arts world, and so I am regularly, in the New York Times reading obituaries of people who have some form of artistic accomplishment, many of whom I've never heard of, and so it introduces me to a fascinating life, hopefully well lived, and certainly contributions to our world from these individuals in one form or another. And I think you're onto something. Clearly it's a fascinating way to spend our time to enrich ourselves, hopefully.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of the arts, I think one of the largest obituaries just happened 3 days ago when after Jean-Luc Godard passed away, and they had
Yes.
two and a half pages dedicated to him. And there was so much of stuff I didn't know about him beyond his films. And like you said, educative in multiple dimensions.
Oh, absolutely. So I mentioned you did really interesting things during the pandemic. So let's fast forward a little bit, because um, I also encountered uh, a book that you wrote at some point, and timeline is a little unclear to me based on sort of some of the references in the book about when you wrote it, when all these things were happening, if these actually, as most writers know, maybe you compressed some of the things into format to make the story come across well. And I know stories and storytelling is an interest, a passion of yours as well. But you wrote this book. It's called Name, Place, Animal, Thing. Tell me, how did that all come about?
Again, thank you for checking it out. And it's funny what you mentioned about the timelines, because it was written in 2020 with the optimism of a world where a vaccine is discovered and we've gone beyond COVID when it hadn't been discovered yet.
Mm,
So that's why the timelines are a little blurred, because it
yeah,
is written for a post-vaccinated world, but in 2020. And I hoped that it wouldn't backfire miraculously, where you kind of find that truth is totally different. But fortunately, that's kind of what happened. I think a good way to stitch those timelines, if that's okay, is actually to start off from Unmetric, the previous company I told you,
sure.
because yeah, so end of 2019, around circa October 2019, Unmetric gets acquired. We get acquired by a Copenhagen-based company, who in turn had been previously acquired by an American public company called Cision. I know you know the marketing agency space, so PR technology company Cision.
Yep.
And they were 3 weeks after our acquisition acquired by a private equity group. So what in effect happened was, within a month we moved from being an independent company of 75 people to having a parent, grandparent, and a corporate great grandparent, all within the span of 1 month, right? And crazy thing on perspective, I thought that's the craziest that can happen in life. And in November, I'd gone for a customer conference in Copenhagen. And that same day, my older son had a medical emergency in Berlin, where he was doing a semester abroad.
Hmm.
So he was in hospital there, the German military hospital, for 2 weeks, and then had to be airlifted in a Lufthansa air ambulance into New Jersey, where he was here in hospital for 2 months. He's well now. Everything's good. In fact, everything's perfectly fine now. So I want to fast forward to
Yes.
the good news. But at that time, this was nerve wracking. I mean, you can imagine for anybody, for any parent, for anyone, in fact. So suddenly, priorities and everything changed radically in life over a 2.5 month period, because this was totally surreal stuff that came from left field. He gets discharged around April 2020, and then within 2 months, the whole world goes into lockdown, right? So it was one surreal thing after another. So once that happened as well, I just decided that I needed a break for my own mental peace, and me and a lot of the founding team once the last of our team transitioned into the acquiring company, left in May of 2020, right? I quickly found that I was incapable of sitting still. I thought I'll take a break for some time. And that's when I decided to channel my newfound free time into writing this book, which was in a whole bunch of post-it notes and different Apple notes and all over the place. Even Evernote, if you remember that. But it was all over, right? I had all these points I'd put, which loosely fit under the structure of Name, Place, Animal, Thing, the book. Um, the thesis of the book is actually very simple. It's rooted in an old childhood game, which is especially popular in South Asia, and the game is called Name, Place, Animal, Thing. It's a paper game. But the thesis of the book, I don't think it's a spoiler per se, but it's like, build more things, physical and virtual. Like what you're building is a virtual thing, which is a podcast, right? We all of us need to build more and more things like you're doing. Travel to places, not just far and wide, even near and narrow, and get in touch with your inner animal. Remembering that in effect we're all animals, and in effect wear multiple hats or names in society beyond just what it says in the most recent line of your LinkedIn profile, right? So that's the thesis of the book. I started writing it as a non-fiction book, and then cringed when I read my first mid version and said, no, this is not kind of how it's going to work. Always been a fan of the allegory genre, which is like Jonathan Livingston Seagull, Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, and the books where there's a lesson intertwined with a story. So for a debut author who's never written anything before, I think it was slightly foolish to embark on writing a nonfiction plus fiction combined in that format. But this was something I needed to do or wanted to do, and I absolutely loved the journey. And that's how Name, Place, Animal, Thing came. So I wrote it in 2020, but released the book in the beginning of 2021. And funnily enough, the company I run now, which is, I know it's a podcast, but the T-shirt you can see here, Stream Alive, was actually born from the book. So it's quite crazy how one thing leads to the other. Although I had no clue that's going to happen at that point in time.
Well, and so you've solved a question that I had, because the protagonist of the book, the storyteller, is not named Lux. And so to understand exactly how all of these experiences that he's going through, the mentorship and guides that he's encountering are really enriching his life and his opportunity to experience new things or see things that he's already experienced through a different lens. I think is pretty fascinating. But now I understand why his name he didn't share your name. So so you mentioned that the book then leads to again, during the pandemic, you're doing something, or at least the pandemic may or may not be continuing at this point, but you are also, with all of these things that you're personally likely exploring, you're writing a book, you're also launching a new company. And so how did Stream Alive get connected to the book, or the other way around, I guess?
Yeah. And just to clarify on the book, I mean, besides enjoying the process of writing it with all the personal chaos that was happening, it was extremely cathartic for me to just sit and do something which is a creative project, and it was a startup of one, so to speak, right? I mentioned to you that was my first book. So I didn't know the first thing about writing a book, about editing a book, marketing a book, publicizing a book. I'm grateful you read the book, and maybe you're thinking in your head, he still doesn't know the first thing about writing a book and think, but keeping that aside for a second.
But the experience that you're describing, it's my first time doing it, I'm exploring it, is exactly the point that you're making in the book.
Actually, yes. I mean, in a meta way, yes. I mean, go try stuff, right? It doesn't matter.
There you go. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So I and this was a pandemic, right? So there was a whole bunch of, the whole online course thing had just exploded. So I signed up for 6 different courses on these subjects, on how to write, market, edit, and publicize a book. And these were classes delivered over more often than not Zoom meetings, like what we're doing, or a Zoom webinar, or YouTube Live, or Facebook Live, but some form of live stream or live meeting where someone would use a combination of recorded lessons and live lessons to explain whatever they were teaching, whether it's marketing a book or how to get Jeff Bezos and Amazon to bless your book, right?
Yeah.
So these 6 classes were delivered over the course of I attended them towards the end of 2020, and they entailed a total of 56 live streams that I had attended, class sizes ranged from 10 people to 1,100 people. But I saw a couple of things, and when you see so many live streams across platforms within a compressed period of time, you start to notice patterns. And this was the lucky break I got. I started seeing a lot of interesting patterns, which is I think some of these might be familiar to you since you've been a part and started so many different communities.
Mm-hmm.
The chat would fly by faster than the presenter can see. Okay. The presenter would ask a question like, hey, where are you all joining us from? And people would enthusiastically type where they're actually joining in from and say, hello from Cairo, or I'm in Rome, or I'm in Jersey, I'm in Portland, Oregon. And then the presenter would, let's say 100 people had responded, he would call out maybe 3 people and ignore the remaining 97, which is understandable because if the presenter would read 100 locations, he or she would be a geography teacher and it would be pretty weird. So it's understandable that you ignore it. But if you think about it, David, it's quite unnatural as well, right? I mean, it's unnatural for me to ask you a question and totally ignore your answer. But we do it in these scenarios because it's par for the course.
Yeah.
Right? And something that struck me, especially coming from what at that point seemed like an old world of speaking in public, is you would ask people questions in public and the audience would collectively give an answer by raising their hands or standing up or moving to the left or moving to the right or whatever, right? Or standing up or sitting down. We always had these things to get an audience involved as a group, but we didn't have that in a live stream. So our thinking was, and this is where connective tissue comes from Unmetric as well, where our forte was getting structured insights from unstructured data. Over here, I saw a similar opportunity where the chat is, in theory, unstructured. It's people putting a whole bunch of stuff, but there is context to it. Like when you ask people, where are you joining from, they're not going to say pizza and hamburger. They're going to say a place, right? So there is context to people's responses most of the time, especially when it's in response to a question. So can we visualize the chat in real time by giving a collective visual voice to the audience? So, for example, presenter asking people where you're joining from, people type locations. Can you create a real-time map that pulses as people type their locations, right? And a bunch of other interactions I'm happy to jump into and show the canvas of possibilities. But our broad thinking was these presentations and live streams were very one-way. They were very autocratic.
Mm-hmm.
Can we make them two-way? Can we make them democratic? Can we give the audience a voice? And that was the idea behind Streamer Live.
So the way that you've just described this, I'm envisioning something that you mention. You use it in your TED Talk. I think you even mention it in the book, which is word clouds. Are we talking about trying to create some sort of interactivity for the audience by even if the presenter isn't directly engaging verbally, that they are feeling heard and feeling like they're participating because of something that is happening while the presentation is going on?
It's uncanny how you picked that particular common narrative thread, but word clouds were the seed of an inspiration there because I do believe that a visualization of language allows you to infer things in a much better way than is otherwise possible.
Mm.
So let me give you an instance. This morning there was a webinar where someone used Stream Live on 150 people who joined there, and they asked them a simple question like, when you hear the expression behavioral science, what are the 1 or 2 words that come to your mouth, to your mind, right? And you had 150 people putting answers in there, and suddenly, the words dance and move. And after about 3 to 4 minutes, the word nudge and the word habit become bigger. So it's quite beautiful how you can give, you can figure out what is the dominant voice within an audience if you can use technology in interesting ways. Now, this is not something you can do in a real audience, but you can do it online. So I mean, that's why Stream Alive. Can we make this a little more alive by giving a voice to the audience? But you're absolutely right. The first thing we started with before the map that I described was word clouds.
So as you were starting to describe it, where I thought you were going to be going was bringing the sophistication of some of the webinar tools that exist out there. And I'm not talking about old school WebEx or GoToWebinar, but the ones that really, I think, marketers for the most part developed, Webinar Jam, or some of these tools that are creating Webinar Ninja is the one that I use. Demio is another one that have interactivity are purposefully developed to have engagement with the audience, have things pop up at certain times so that it's perfectly timed to be able to offer a download or a call to action or things like that, and introduce that to streaming platforms. What I'm hearing, though, is that it's really addressing a very different or an additional set of needs that I don't think anybody's really addressed, which is to enhance the experience and maybe even thoughtfulness of the audience in terms of not just getting them to participate through activity, but getting their mind working in a different way.
Absolutely, because um, the fundamental thesis is help people track, increase, and track and increase engagement, right, and even convert engagement. But it's rooted in inclusivity that comes from A, getting people to do things, and two, I mean, we've always asked people where you're joining from, for example, but they put an answer and then nothing happens. And then guess what? The next time they're in a webinar and someone says where you're joining from, they're not going to answer the question.
Yeah.
But when people's answers get acknowledged, even if it's a microsecond of acknowledgement, something beautiful happens. For example, the map thing, people have told us that they usually don't answer that at all. But then they find, let's say you were in a meeting and you're jaded about this and you say, who cares where I'm joining from? But then you see the map of the US lit up and there's no representation from Portland, Oregon. You're almost going to feel obligated to participate, right? So I think when you get people to do something in a totally tangential way, I remember listening to one of your podcasts where you talked about something that the Reader's Digest did to, I think, triple their subscription from about 4 million people to 12 million people, where they sent, please correct me if I'm wrong here, sent a couple of pennies along with the envelope, and then you get to keep one if you send one towards your subscription, where they knock off a penny from your subscription. But the act of taking it, sticking it on an envelope, putting something, essentially made people get a lot more participated than otherwise, right? When you get people to do things and you actually include that, and it's a very simple way of getting people to engage, right? Our simple formula for engagement is include people, ask them a question, and that's it. It's as simple as that. It's like you mentioned, get people to do something, stick something, send something. They are more engaged. It's I think the same logic that we've seen work 70 years ago work even now.
I'm thinking about, all of the different things that a presenter has the ability to include in their presentation, the sort of psychological triggers, like getting an audience member. And this happens even a one-on-one scenario in a sales conversation where you get people to continuously say yes or agree because you're leading them to a point where you're going to then put an offer, and because they've had repeated positive reactions, they're more likely to say yes. Do you see this as helping in that area, or is it really addressing a different set of needs, like understanding how to get more engagement in general? I'm trying to understand where this fits best, and where to apply it. I mean,
Right.
probably could apply in all these situations, but what was your inspiration?
So short answer on that is all the situations. In fact, when people ask us who's Streamer Live relevant for, and I struggle, but my short form answer is teachers, preachers, sellers, and entertainers, and town halls, meetings, trainings, and all hands. So that's a pretty big canvas, right? But to touch upon what you specifically mentioned, at a fundamental level, the increased engagement endears whoever is talking better to the people who are listening, and therefore makes it more conducive for them to buy what you're selling if you're selling something. A lot of intent signals come out from people in the course of participation. So, for example, if you're selling a course on how to write a book, which is the one I attended, one of the first questions they used to ask us was, okay, folks, when are you planning to write your next book? Is it in the next 3 months, next 6 months, this year, next year, right? And people would answer, and those answers would be lost. But if you actually capture it, if you think about it, the folks who said next 3 months or next 6 months are probably the lower hanging leads than the folks who said next year or I have no clue when. So in the right hands, we're seeing this as a canvas where the right kind of person can paint what they want. So we have folks who are teaching IELTS English classes on YouTube and making it a lot more fun for students. We have folks who are teaching property investing on YouTube and doing exactly that. We have universities using us to do, behavioral science kind of sessions to make it more exciting rather than just a bunch of academics talking. So the way we are seeing it right now is still early days. It's like a canvas, and then you want to see what people do with it, right? What are they going to paint with it? And we're seeing all kinds of different use cases. We have a couple of CEOs who are using us for all hands and town halls because they want to make it more inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We have one YouTuber who asked a very fundamental question to his audience, which he didn't have the answer to previously, which is he ran a poll using Stream Alive. And he said, folks, I know you, most of my audience is in the 20s, but I'm curious, are you guys college students? Are you entrepreneurs? Are you working somewhere or something else? And they just had to type 1, 2, 3, 4 in the YouTube chat. And as they typed, the polls danced, and he found out that almost 80% of his audience were college students. And then he knew that what he needs to talk thereafter, if he's going to talk about, things like your third job or something, it's not relevant content for them because they haven't even gotten onto their first job. So it allowed him to tailor his content.
Yeah, that's
So
it's great. It's really enhanced polls. I mean, I again going to the old school um uh, webinar tools, they have those. Let's put the poll up, or everybody, enter your answer, and then we'll show the results at the end. But the ability to do this and do it on platforms that it's not currently built for is kind of cool. So I'm thinking through, all right, how I'm going to ask you to coach me through this, because like, how can I apply this in some of the activities I have? We have in our business, twice a month, we you and I discussed this earlier. We sell a consulting process to professional marketing service providers, and we know that in order to get to that sale, we need to cultivate relationships. So over the course of each month, we do, and we're also very big believers in self-education. Reading is a big part of that, and we started a book club for marketing agency owners, right? Let's talk about learning something, and have a shared knowledge and shared experience as the basis for where we then take our conversations next. So twice a month we have a marketing agency owner roundtable where we watch a 15-ish minute video summary of a book, and then we have a conversation. Sometimes it's about the book, sometimes it's a hot seat kind of mastermind situation where somebody brings a challenge or a problem that they have. How can I apply this? We're doing these on Zoom right now, but how can I apply a tool like Stream Alive to enhance the experience? And I'm sort of, thinking about all the possibilities. So coach me through this.
sure, happy to. And by the way, that's a brilliant idea. I mean, I'm just wondering why no one else thought of it. A book club for marketing agency owners. It makes so much sense because it's such a curated list of books that folks like you and I
Yeah.
tend to gravitate towards. So why not have a book club around it? Beautiful idea, first of all.
Thank you.
And if it's you mentioned it's on Zoom, correct?
We currently do them on Zoom. Yeah.
Okay, that's perfect because at this point in our life, the only three platforms, or rather the three major platforms we support are YouTube Live, Microsoft Teams, and Zoom.
Okay.
So it's Zoom meetings and Zoom webinars. So you asked me to talk you through it, so I'll just what I would do is if I were you, and I'm happy to take you through it later as well, which is sign up for a free account on Stream Alive. Once you sign up, it takes you into the dashboard, which is, I mean, it runs on a browser, so it's a SaaS platform. It's software as a service. You would log into your account, and Zoom is interestingly one of the easiest ones for Streamalive to connect to, where you would say, just like you sent me a link for the Zoom that we're doing right now, you would give that same link that people use to join that book club twice a month meeting. You'd give that link to the application, and Streamalive would join the meeting as a bot and would read the chat in real time. So after that, all you're doing is really sharing your, so let's say you run that video that you said you run in the beginning, you talk about the book a little bit, and then you might share your, I'm making this up, obviously. You might even decide to open it up with Stream Alive, where you share your Stream Alive screen. And at that point, Stream Alive is already reading your chat in real time. And you tell people, hey, folks, where are you joining us from? Right? Now, The big other thing we notice, and I should have mentioned this earlier, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to do so, is that in the few places that people allowed for interaction, they would ask people to scan a QR code, go to a different website, go somewhere to participate, and stuff like that. But that's a lot of friction.
Yeah,
So what you would do in this case is you would tell people to simply type their answers in the Zoom chat. So you're showing you start this feature we have called Magic Maps within Stream Alive. You ask because you're expecting a geography, and then you type in, Portland, Oregon, and I type New York City, and someone else types Cairo, and all these places light up in the map that you're showing by sharing your screen,
yeah.
because the bot is reading the chat, passing it to the Stream Alive app, and in less than 1/10 of a second, it is mapping that out on the map over there, right? And each person's name comes up for a microsecond. So everybody is, I mean, our pitch is we move from 95% ignored to 95% engaged. So you might run that, and then you might say, okay, folks, now we have a poll. Have you finished the book, not finished the book, or you're still in the process of reading the book? Okay, for the folks who finished the book or are more than halfway past, if you had to talk about 3 words that stuck out to you in terms of the theme of the book, what is it going to be? And they put something in a word cloud you can do. And then after that, you might say, okay, what is the one? You said this is for marketing agency owners, so presumably a lot of the books are nonfiction books that teach
Correct.
things.
It's
So you
it's
might
almost all business books. Yes.
right. So you might say, okay, the book had many things. What is the one thing you're going to take forward into your business in the next quarter? And then for that, you would open this feature we have called transient thoughts, whereas each person types it almost like, listening in the lobby of a theater where you hear different conversations and they kind of come into your consciousness and disappear. You'll have thought bubbles that in real time capture people's thoughts, adequately give a longer comment, longer airplay, but almost magically makes it sound like different people are talking in the room by giving a visual sense of it. And then you'll say, okay, folks, we have a surprise. We've got this one book that we're going to give away. So anybody who put at least one comment out there, you're going to spin this wheel and all those names are going to be spun, and then it's going to end with something. And hey, John's been amazing. John, you get a copy of my book, which we're giving away this time. So it's a whole bunch of templates for participation. I mean, polls, word clouds, and maps are what we started off with. But by the end of the year, we'll have about a dozen different things, like just like PowerPoint and stuff have templates for how you should talk to people. We're building templates for how people should talk to you.
Sure. I love. Okay, so it's clearly application beyond an educational course setting, and I can see how businesses can easily apply this. And I'm thinking now, as you were describing that, of applications for like a local professional services based business, a financial advisor, an attorney, or an accountant who wants to get onto a live stream to teach a concept to then attract people into their business, and how it's much more interesting, much more engaging, and the opportunity to make a connection with that presenter is heightened because of the experience of going through these extra thoughtful activities that you might otherwise, have a pretty bland presentation, on saving for your children's college or for your retirement.
That's exactly the idea, David. I couldn't have put it better, because it just becomes so much different when it's a two-way conversation. And we see that so we have this analytics module that tells you at the end of it as to how things went. And it's fascinating. You see a certain level on comments, and then when you ask a question, zoop, it just spikes up. And then you finish your question, it spikes down again. I mean, no surprises. If you acknowledge people's answers, if you ask them a question, they will give you answers. And we see that pattern. The first few people very precariously answer, and then they see, oh wow, my name's coming up there, I'm getting mapped out there, or the poll danced or moved, or my word came up there, or my thought came up as a bubble, or my name is spinning in a disk. And that prompts everybody else to participate because they know that they're not going to be ignored. So it's something very, very powerful that happens in terms of the communication dynamic between people.
This is a really cool way of talking about something that I think is incredibly important for every business owner to think about, and it's the core of my business, which is to approach what you're trying to do strategically rather than tactically. And you've got this really cool tool that people see. And by the way, I'm a self-admitted AppSumo junkie. I buy everything mostly because I want to, do what the tool does. But I then have buyer's remorse because strategically, it doesn't have a place in my business. And I can see, as we've been talking, there's all kinds of strategic application for this if somebody actually approaches it properly. And so that's the key, I think, with any tool like this, is to really figure out what the function, what the purpose of it is in your organization and your business, and how is it going to help enhance the environment and the activity for the participants to then move them to where you want to bring them next, or to keep them around, or whatever other goal you may have. And clearly you've thought a lot about how it can play an active role in addressing a lot of the shortcomings of these online events that we've become used to over the last couple of years.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the shortcomings were very glaring in that compressed period where I attended those 56 live streams. We started with some of the obvious ones in terms of interactions, but after that, our roadmap is literally being used by a lot of our users right now. We were in beta till about a month and a half ago. And then we launched on Product Hunt. And then we got a lot more people and folks using us and giving us amazing feedback. So some of these features and interactions that I described and seem to take credit for were actually suggestions from very passionate users.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating. We have people book time on my calendar just to give us feedback, tell us that, why can't you build this? You guys should do this, and oh, this can be better this way. And that to me is amazing, when people care enough to carve out a slice of their life to tell you what you should be doing. And total side note, I mean, it's funny and uncanny how many different intersections we found in this conversation. I'm an AppSumo junkie as well, and don't want to get ahead of myself, but you might see us there by the end of the year.
Well, good luck with that. It's an exciting environment, both on Product Hunt and AppSumo, to see all of the brilliant innovation that folks like you are contributing to the world, which brings us back to one of the big points that you made earlier in our conversation, and one of the big points in your book as well. So I want to make sure that folks know how to access Stream Alive if they're interested in signing up and testing it out on an event on Zoom or Teams or on YouTube.
It's simply streamalive.com, and it's absolutely free at this point. So even if you wanted to pay us right now, you couldn't. But down the line, even when we start charging, we will always have a free plan. So there's really no barrier for people to try and use the product. We just want to change the way we communicate at scale, and I think there's some very interesting ways you can do that while having fun, and as a company down the line making money as well.
Yeah,
And just personally, I'm at luxnarayan.com.
perfect. We'll make sure that folks can find you there, because as we've discussed, there's a lot more to you than just this particular product that you happen to be working on at this point in time in your life. So, Lux, this has been a fabulous conversation. Thanks so much for joining me.
This has been fun. I mean, I don't even feel this was a podcast thing. I mean, we were just having a fun conversation. Thank you, David.
Oh,
Thoroughly
totally.
enjoyed this.
Well, folks, if you enjoyed listening to our fun conversation and you think you know somebody who could benefit from listening as well, I'd certainly appreciate it if you shared it. Until next time, I'm David Baer, and this is More Perfect Marketing. Take care.